Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. This is the Fast Friday edition of the show for May 7th, 2021. And on this episode, I'm talking about declarations of independence in 1776. And yes, that's plural. I know all of you are familiar with July 4th. Many of you are aware of the Lee Resolution on July 2nd. And I know some of you are aware of August 1st, the great speech by Samuel Adams the day before the Declaration was signed. But there were dozens of other official statements and resolutions all the way down to a local level that preceded these. They built consensus for what happened in July and August and support for it as well. Rhode Island, for example, North Carolina, Virginia, and elsewhere, and even a mechanics union in New York. I'm going to cover all this and more very briefly in just a moment, but first of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage is everything you need to follow this program, all the archives on individual episodes like this. Today, I'm going to include a bunch of links so you can read and learn more on your own time. I even have 2 other episodes that I'm going to encourage you to check out in relationship to this episode as well. You can find all the different platforms we're on, both video and the podcast edition. And you can even find our membership program where you can put your financial faith behind our work for as little as $2 a month. And absolutely nothing helps us get the job done more than the support of our members. Thank you. All that and more over at the show homepage, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And I couldn't be more grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one, I can't thank you enough. But since it's Fast Friday, I promise to not take up too much of your time. Let's see if I can get this info out to you in the next 10 to 15 minutes. And to start, as I mentioned before, I want to quickly point you to 2 previous episodes. First of all, let me pull this up on the screen. Free and independent states, going beyond the Declaration I did July 3rd, 2020, last summer. You're going to learn about all kinds of cool stuff in that one, but primarily I'm pointing you to this one because I talk about the Lee Resolution of July 2nd. This is a date that some thought was actually going to be Independence Day. And then there's another episode I did just a few weeks later, Samuel Adams, American Independence. This is on his great speech of August 1st, 1776, the day before the signing of the Declaration. I will link to both of those in the show notes. And with that, this week in history, I guess let's just go to history.com. On May 4th, 1776, Rhode Island, the colony founded by the most radical religious dissenters from the Puritans of Massachusetts Bay Colony, becomes the first North American colony to renounce its allegiance to King George III. They actually passed a piece of legislation officially renouncing allegiance. Now, all the colonies were required to have an official statement of allegiance to the king, and this is the first one to say, no. Now, it's known by many people in Rhode Island. It's not an official state-sanctioned holiday, but it's well known as Rhode Island Independence Day. And I know some historians take issue with that, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But first of all, to the New England Historical Society. So on May 4th, it's pretty amazing how fast this stuff moves when they want to. Jonathan Arnold drew up a bill that repealed an act of allegiance to the king. It enacted instead an oath of allegiance to the state. It also decreed that all court proceedings should be performed in the name of the state, not the king. The bill replaced God Save the King with the phrase God Save the United Colony. So some logistical changes, but an official announcement, an official act on the books repealing an act of allegiance to the king. And here from Rhode Island Historical Society, they actually have the full title of the original piece of legislation, which is just wild. Check this out. An act repealing an act entitled, an act for the more effectual securing to his majesty the allegiance of his subjects in this his colony and dominion of Rhode Island and Providence plantations, and altering the form of commissions and all writs and processes in the courts, and of the oaths prescribed by law. There are only 2 known copies of this in existence. Rhode Island Historical Society has one. I've got it up on the screen here. I think it's just kind of cool to take a look at. I will link to that image in the show notes so you can look at it at your own time. And as I mentioned, some historians reject, they scoff at the idea of calling it Rhode Island Independence Day. They say, well, they didn't sign the Declaration of Independence till some time later, so they weren't really declaring independence. It doesn't say anything about independence in that act of blah, 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 blah. They're just renouncing their allegiance. But if renouncing your allegiance, which is required to be part of the empire, is an official act, to me, there is really it's maybe a difference in name, but it's not a difference in form or style. They were officially saying, we are done with this. We're out of here. We're no longer holding ourselves any loyalty to the king. So Rhode Island, the first official declaration of independence by any of the colonies, any of the states, there on May 4th, 1776. And while they were the first to do that, to renounce their allegiance, North Carolina actually was the first to hear from All Things Liberty, which is the Journal of the American Revolution. Great website. They write, in mid-April, the North Carolina legislature became the first to officially call for independence. There were, of course, quite a bit of talk about independence. Sometimes you can go way back. But in that time, there was a lot of people talking about it, and the North Carolina legislature made it official, calling for this in I think it was April 12th. By mid-May, they write, 7 others had joined it. And what they're talking about for North Carolina are the Halifax Resolves. Here it again is April 12th. The resolves directed, and this is from North Carolina history, the resolves directed North Carolina to declare independence. I mean, it's pretty close to actually doing it. They're saying, we're going to do this. This is the first step. And that's how some people will look at the Lee resolution, was the directive, and the declaration a couple days later was the official statement. So the resolves directed North Carolina to declare independence, to join with other colonies in similar endeavors, and to reserve the right of North Carolina to create their own constitution. This is a pretty huge thing. Once word gets out of that, okay, North Carolina's basically doing it, right? Again, from NorthCarolinaHistory.org, the Provincial Congress unanimously adopted the Halifax Resolves, and a copy was sent to the North Carolina delegate to the Continental Congress, Joseph Hughes. A few weeks later in Virginia, May 15th, the preamble and resolution of the Virginia Convention. Just this one brief part I'm going to cite here. Of course, I will link to it in the show notes. They passed this, resolved unanimously that the delegates appointed to represent this colony in General Congress be instructed to propose to that respectable body to declare the United Colonies free and independent states, absolved from all allegiance to or dependence upon the Crown or Parliament of Great Britain. I mean, as you hear these things, you might be recognizing how my brain works when I think strategically on how to advance liberty on efforts today. Sometimes it's good to pass resolutions because it builds support and consensus for a bigger thing. That's what John Dickinson talked about in 1767 in his response to the hated Townshend Acts in his letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. Small things grow great by concord. Even just a non-binding resolution supporting a specific action or opposing one can bring others on board. It rallies people to the cause, and it gets things to move forward. And the penman of the revolution was clearly correct. And this is basically what was happening throughout 1776, well before the Declaration was even drafted. And here on May 29th, I believe, May 29th, 1776, this is from the New York Mechanics Union. Even a local union of workers passed their own resolution supporting independence. They put it this way, and I just got one little quote here. I will link to the full text in the show notes. "We will not become their slaves and be taxed by them without our consent. Therefore, as we would rather choose to be separate from than to continue any longer in connection with such oppressors, we, the Committee of Mechanics in Union, do for ourselves and our constituents hereby publicly declare that, should you gentlemen of the Honorable Congress," in other words, go forward, and if you think it's okay as well, we should push for independence. Again, resolutions like this from various groups, from local areas, from other colonies, they all build the consensus and support needed for a big step to get passed. Here, back to the Journal of American Revolution, they say in New Jersey, the legislature decided on June 15th, 76, to arrest Royal Governor William Franklin. I actually have not read that history, so they've got a link to it. I'm going to have to learn about that soon. And to order their delegates to the Congress to vote for independence. And the way that they wrote that is to order them. So even though it wasn't an official declaration of independence on June 15th, they're telling their delegates, like, look, this is your instruction. You're going to vote for independence. Is New Jersey officially declaring it? What would they have done had the Continental Congress not approved it? Would some more of these colonies have taken their own steps in their own hands? I think it's very likely. Going further again from the Journal, in Maryland, pro-independence leaders led by Samuel Chase expelled their proprietary governor and called on the counties to hold emergency conventions on the question, with the result that they voted for independence and overrode the provincial convention in an emergency session on June 28th. Here, historian David Greenberg tells us that declarations of separation from the crown were issued too by the people of Topsfield, Massachusetts, of Kings District, New York, which is part of Albany Colony, of Anne Arundel County, Maryland, and by almost every colonial assembly. There were actually about 90 to 100 of these other declarations, resolutions, and the like passed in the months leading up to July 1776. Towns, associations, even some local militias. And going further, Greenberg puts it this way: for this deeper understanding of the Declaration's origins, we can thank the late, and I'll say great, Pauline Maier, one of the great historians of the Revolutionary period, whose 1997 book, American Scripture, Making the Declaration of Independence, recovered these rich documents and plumbed their importance in the story of the Republic. This is actually one of my favorite books. Pauline is one of my favorite people to read. Just awesome stuff. She writes it in an interesting narrative style. Again, I will link to this in the show notes. This is right from the publisher. It's a $17 paperback, and they also list a bunch of other places that you can pick this book up. American Scripture, Making the Declaration of Independence. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope you enjoyed hearing me talk about it. I hope you're encouraged to read and learn more on your own time. Of course, if you like this episode, you like our work, you support us, and you want to help us spread the word, there's a few easy peasy things you can do right now. Smash the like button, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform, subscribe, get notifications, comments. All of this stuff really helps a lot. It triggers it primarily on the mainstream platforms. It triggers their algorithm, and it tells them to show the program to more people. Thank you for any consideration you can give to that. And of course, our membership program, as I mentioned, starts out as little as $2 a month, and we make it go a long, long way in support of the Constitution and liberty. You can find that over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Well, I hope you enjoyed this information as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.